Alrighty then, hello everyone. Welcome to a book-based interview where today we talk to Jesse Moynihan. Jesse is a cartoonist, animator, and writer who's not only worked on amazing projects like the show Adventure Time on Cartoon Network and The Midnight Gospel on Netflix, but he's also created his own webcomics like Forming and Follow Me, as well as the animation Manly, which have been received quite well among his audience. Jesse, thank you for being on. This is awesome.
Hey, nice to see you again.
Yeah. Just want to let you know, dude, I've watched Adventure Time and all those Cartoon Network shows when I was young, so you
Oh,
actually took hand in part of my childhood, so thank you for doing what you do. But yeah, let's just get started. So yeah, I did mention that you are a cartoonist and you're an animator and stuff, and I actually have been, I did read up about you. I think it's cool they have a Wikipedia page, first of all. That's actually pretty legit. But
uh,
yeah, no, but reading that story, I did read about how you grew up in Philadelphia and you decided to pursue a degree in film, and you actually specifically wanted to focus on comics. And I just wanted to ask, like, why that path? How did you find out that was what you wanted to do? And what were some inspirations growing up that kind of helped you clarify what path you wanted to go on?
well, when I was growing up, when I was a kid in elementary school and middle school, I read tons of comics. I read tons of X-Men comics and Ninja Turtles comics and stuff like that. And I used to draw them also. So I would draw X-Men and Ninja Turtles. I That's primarily what I remember. Oh, and I would draw lots of like fantasy stuff. So I played Dungeons and Dragons. So I used to draw. I used to look up to the Dungeons and Dragons artists and stuff like that. Guys like Larry Elmore, and I would draw lots of dragon fantasy stuff and dragon anything fantasy comics. So I was drawing comics at a young age, and I had friends who also like to draw comics.
Got it.
So um, then in high school, I I was still drawing comics, and I think I self-published my first comic in high school. Um, Called The Toilet Incident that I just made on a copy machine and I distributed to friends in high school. And some of my friends still have copies of it. So that was my first self-published comic.
Hmm.
And then um, I kept making comics, but I never really understood. I never knew like how to break into comics. I didn't
Hmm.
know how to get published, all that kind of stuff. I had read some how-tos about it back in the day, but it just didn't seem, I don't know, it didn't seem realistic to me or something. And so I went to film school. I went to Temple Film School in Philadelphia,
Hmm.
thinking, oh, maybe I could get into the film industry because I was also shooting home movies and stuff throughout middle school and high school. I would make movies with my friends. So I wanted to be a live action filmmaker. And but then during my time at Temple, I kind of got less interested in making live action films.
Got it.
It just seemed too financially, um, what do you call it? There were too many barriers, like financially. I couldn't afford to spend $10,000 on my senior thesis film and stuff like that. That some of my classmates were spending.
Hmm.
So, um, so instead, I was a big fan of this film director named Alejandro Jodorowsky, and he made a few cult films in the 70s. And then when he couldn't get financing afterwards for his next movies, he just started making comic books. And I was like, oh yeah, I've been drawing comics my whole life. I just never thought it was like a thing I could try to pursue as a career.
Right.
But what I ended up doing was I was pen pals with some other comic artists who were actually publishing, and just started asking them questions about like, what am I supposed to do? How do I get published? And blah blah blah. And they told me to, make my own zines and then show up at these conventions. And so I started doing that, making mini comics and zines, going to conventions in on the East Coast, and then eventually I got to know some publishers, and that they put out my books, started putting out my books. Oh, and I also got a grant from the one of the creators of the Ninja Turtles.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
Peter Laird, had a foundation, and they funded my first. like they gave me like $3,000 to self-publish a couple floppy comics. And that's when I started going to conventions and meeting publishers and things like that. And this small publisher called Bodega put out my first graphic novel.
That's awesome. So, from what you're telling me, it seems like to get into the comic book industry, it definitely takes a lot of networking, right? Having to go to like conventions, meeting people that not only give advice, but really help you kind of see what the path really looks like to get a career in that field.
Yeah, I would say it's like less so about networking now because the internet is like so everyone, no one's leaving their house or whatever.
Right,
But still, I would still say it's still important.
right, right.
And that for me, this was around 2005 when I was starting to hit the independent comics circuit, like convention circuit.
Got it.
And if I hadn't, I was going to SPX in Baltimore. I was going to conventions in New York. I was going to conventions in Philadelphia and in San Francisco and Portland, things like that. So FaceTime, like meeting people, not FaceTime on the screen, but FaceTime, like putting in FaceTime in IRL
Right.
was huge for me getting to know all of the people involved in the indie comic scene. And I would still say to this day, pretty important. Although you can make a huge name for yourself online now, and maybe you never have to leave your house. But I would say if you have no internet clout and you want to just jump into comics and
Right.
like and people to get to know you, you start hitting up small zine fairs and things like that, and try to make friends and table at bigger conventions and stuff like that, and just be putting out work. And then that's how you really, because the scene is small,
Right, right.
so we'll get to know everybody pretty much.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I guess this also has to do with like maybe you as a creator as well. I do have some questions about the webcomic you created for me.
Mhm.
Before we get into like the whole plot about it and just your inspiration for creating that, as an artist, especially as a cartoonist, and you're meeting all these comic book people and you're networking, how do you know, like, has it always just been whenever it comes to your drawings or your creations, is it just about you having fun, or is there a little bit of legitimacy to it to where it's like you also have to be quote unquote a good artist? Because I feel like there's a lot of people that maybe want to get into the industry, but they're scared, thinking like, they could maybe draw a ninja turtle, but maybe like they don't know if it's a good ninja turtle. Like, do you think the emphasis should be on whether or not you're having fun doing it, or is there a little bit of, hey, you should also rate your drawings and make sure there's a little bit more consistency with the way that your style, I guess, with drawing?
Um, I mean, I think most of my favorite comic book artists are good drawers,
Mm-hmm.
but there have been people over the years who weren't technically good at
Right.
drawing, who made up for it. Maybe they were good writers,
Mm.
good writers, funny. There's a guy, Jason Shiga. His drawings are pretty crude. I don't know if I want to insult him by saying like his drawings are not that great,
Right, right.
but he's good at staging,
Mm.
and he's really good at staging, and um, good he's good at capturing expressions. So he communicates what he needs to in his drawings, and then his real strength is his like very unique writing style.
Got it. Okay.
And so I really liked his books, Book Hunter and Demon, and I thought they were great, really fun to read, really entertaining. The drawings are, um, serviceable,
Yeah.
uh, but he's one of my favorites.
No, that's amazing. Like, that's actually really cool because I kind of see the comic book industry kind of like music, where people only think about getting into it if they can play an instrument. That's how I think about comic books, where it's like you have to draw to be able to be a part of that. But that example right there just shows that you can have other strengths besides just really just drawing, where you can use staging, or you can even use your writing skills, your ability to create expressions, or just good dialogue, good characters. And that also can be translated really well. Like, even if you're not the best drawer, I guess it's overall the experience you're trying to give to your readers. That you don't need to be the perfect animator, the perfect cartoonist to create a fun time. While other people, they just love doing what they're doing. They immerse themselves in their world, and you can get the same satisfaction out of that.
Yeah, I mean, online, like on YouTube, there's like one of the biggest animated things on the internet right now is Skibbity Toilet.
Yeah. Right,
And
right.
Skibbity Toilet isn't like some high watermark for like craft,
Right, right. But it's just
but
funny.
for some reason it's captured the imagination of the whole country,
Right.
or the
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess that's just the beauty of animation, like you could be able to do stuff like that where you can create just like really cool cultural moments like that. And, speaking of like really fun moments, I have started reading Forming, and I think it's really interesting about how, it's about civilizations coming up and being built using alien technology or even like creatures from other realms and dimensions. And I just wanted to ask, like, I definitely got Adventure Time vibes from reading that, but where did you get the idea or the inspiration for this story, especially to go as long as you did for the 300 chapters you did for that, and then even creating Forming too? Like, where did all of this come from?
it came from well, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was like really into conspiracy theories. I was really into ancient aliens
Mm,
and theories and lizard people theories and stuff. I was listening to lots of like conspiracy and stuff and reading books on like alternate history timelines and stuff like that.
right.
I just was really into it. And I was also really into like researching like mystical thinking
Got
stuff,
it.
like different world religions and occult belief systems and stuff like that. So I was all deep into that kind of stuff. That was at the time that was like probably dovetailing with the X Files era of things like conspiracy and things like that, and secret government stuff. And at the same time, it was also kind of on my own personal journey of like trying to understand like what I believed in
Right.
and like spiritually or whatever, and like trying to stake out some sort of like what's the relationship between my spiritual belief and my artistic practice. And and then my yeah so forming the thesis of forming is really just like my ongoing conversation with myself about what it means to be an artist and what it means to be a spiritual being on living on earth, and how do I interpret history and myth.
Yeah.
And I was like really into Joseph Campbell and stuff like that. So I was just trying to figure out, like, connect all the dots between lots of things I was interested in and create a story that I felt would be fun to read at the same time, and not just a history report or like a weird, like, outsider history report or something.
Right.
Uh, I wanted to make an exciting, like, funny and almost like a blockbuster kind of like my version of a blockbuster comic.
Hmm.
Just like big set pieces, big exploding things, and I don't know, lots of color.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's
Um,
true. That fight with Lucifer, where they're
yeah,
having that fight to create Earth, or what, that's
yeah,
dope. I never would have thought about it like that. Like as
yeah,
scientists relate to the Big Bang, but I refuse. Now I'm going with your
yeah,
theory. I totally
yeah,
believe it. Like there was a big war, and yeah, no, I definitely think the two biggest themes that I've seen so far in Forming as I've been reading is the theme of identity and spiritualism, where there are many characters in Forming that are created or they're either entering a new universe and they're trying to find themselves through the environment that they're in. And then there's
Mhm.
also this belief system on whether they should either follow the mission that they've been given from either their higher ups, or if they should follow maybe sometimes what their heart says when they're
Yeah,
deciding to listen to other individuals or even like bad influences or good influences. So I definitely see where you're coming from with that. And I gotta say, it's a very creative outlet for you to be able to create something like that because you're reading about like all these conspiracy theories. You're also thinking about spiritualism, your identity as just someone that's just living on Earth. And I feel like while other people would probably create like depressing poems like The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe or something,
Oh,
you're over here creating really fun, colorful, vibrant comics that convey like while it is confusing and maybe even like difficult to understand, you can still have fun with it. The confusion's the
yeah,
best part.
yeah, and yeah. So it's like not really. There's no like. I mean, there are some character arcs in it, but like it's not carefully planned out. I mean,
Right.
I had a thing, a chart I was like following as I went through the story,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it also is like you said, like I'm figuring out like I like create a character who's like might have like really bad behavior or something, and then I'm spending time with this character with like really terrible morality or something, and then I'm also then you're spending so much time with them that you start to dig into them, and like what part of them are parts that I find sympathetic, or what parts of them are things that at least you can see what the journey they're on to find themselves, and like maybe they're trying to find themselves in a really uh fucked up way or whatever, or that doesn't line up with like Western morality or whatever.
Right.
uh, but it's I'm just like exploring these things, like exploring. It's like you create a character and you just like find out, you're following them along with the reader at the same time. Like I don't know, sometimes these characters I didn't know where they were going to go,
Right.
and like but I wanted to find an emotional through line for them, something where they would be different from where they started. And hopefully yeah hopefully that tracks throughout the whole yeah, so it's less about that's why I was able to do it for so long, because I kind of like didn't know what was going to happen.
Right. Right.
Could just keep going, and whatever mood I was in or whatever I was going through in my life that I could interpret into these characters, like not going through so much, well, sometimes going through, but sometimes just what am I thinking about, what is interesting me at this point in my life, because it's been like it would took 15 years to finish. So during that time, I went through tons of changes, tons of ways of thinking of things differently. I got less interested in conspiracy theories. I got, more interested in like, at one point, like the story was like being heavily influenced by the Bhagavad Gita, because I had read that at some point during the making of the book. And so, or like I was reading like these like lost non-canonical chapters of the Bible and stuff like that, and so that was influencing me. And um, yeah, or even like conversations I was having, because I used to hang out on 4chan a lot back in the day, and like
Yeah.
conversations I would have with kids on 4chan, like really fucked up conversations, like about art and stuff like that. We would have these arguments and stuff because they knew I worked on Adventure Time, and I would get I would talk on there, like letting them know who I was. I wasn't anonymous on there.
Right.
Sometimes I'd be anonymous on there, but a lot of times I would like make it known, and then we would get into these big arguments and stuff. Sometimes like about what the what the what the what the service, what the artist's obligation is towards their audience and stuff like that. And
Mm.
they 4chan, especially in the cartoons 4chan channel or whatever message board, they're coming from the perspective for the most part of audience,
Right.
of the people who you're making this stuff for. So their point of view is like, what do you, it's sort of like, what are you doing for me, or like why should I even care about what you're doing,
Right.
kind of. So in that way, they're your test group, like they're the meanest test group like you could have, because they're anonymous.
Right. Right. They'll just
They
spit
can
out
say
whatever they
whatever
want.
they want. There's
Yeah.
almost no censorship on there, so they'll just like verbal diarrhea at you, whatever they feel like saying. And sometimes it's really nice, sometimes it's really complimentary,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's like the most hurtful thing they can think of to say to you.
Right, right, absolutely. I mean, I think that's just the nature of 4chan. Like,
Yeah.
I remember like so many stories. I had a lot of friends that have been on that back in the day, and yeah, I totally get the audience that would come out of that. And actually, like, that's actually a really interesting question. Like, in your opinion, do you believe that there is a certain obligation that creators have towards their audiences, or do you think that the creator's first obligation is to do whatever they feel is right, and like the audience should be able to kind of go with the flow with what the creator wants to do?
Well, I think it's a complicated thing. One is like I don't think the audience is obligated to like or give a shit care about anything that you do.
Right.
I don't think there's any sort of obligation they have to um, like anything I make.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying my best. I think I my goal is to entertain. Like I know that's not everyone's goal, but my goal is like I'm trying to make something fun to watch. I'm trying to make whenever I draw or write something, I'm thinking of myself as a spectator, as the audience member. I'm like, would this excite me? Would this feel fresh? Would this feel would this be something I would be excited to see if I had nothing to do with it? That's sort of my personal metric or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at least that's why how I try to keep things in mind when I'm making things. That said, also you can't anticipate what it's almost impossible to know. You can have every graph, every trend, blah blah blah. You really don't know until you put it out into the world if people are going to like it or not.
Right, right.
There's no guaranteed success on anything, and sometimes it almost seems random
Yeah.
that you would hit on something that hits some sort of cultural nerve,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And most of the time you're just whiffing, like, or you're making stuff that's like moderately like there's some people liked it, you
Yeah.
know. And you just keep rolling the dice every time you make something. So the only thing you have as a constant is being like, do I like this?
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah, and if you enjoy it,
So
that's usually a good marker, because that's also something that I've heard before with other authors saying that if you are enjoying it while you're writing it, most likely
mhm.
you're communicating that passion to the reader. If you're writing something that's boring, they're gonna think it's boring when they're reading it, because how are you gonna try to convince other people if you're not convinced?
Yeah, and I think some creators, authors, and artists have this weird, sort of almost like sadomasochistic relationship to the audience, where it's like they want to punish them or something like that. They want to give them their vitamins or something,
Yeah,
and they're like, my way is the best way, and you all should like if you don't like what I'm doing, you're stupid or whatever.
right.
And they're making stuff that's like dreadfully dull, you know.
Yeah, you can say you're talking about Star Wars. It's okay, man, because
Yeah.
that's exactly the argument that I'm seeing right now. Like everybody that's been watching this new Star Wars content, like this is so bland, and then you have Disney being like, "This is Star Wars. You're gonna eat it and you're gonna enjoy it." So yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that about some of the Star Wars stuff I've seen for sure.
Right, right.
And sometimes some stuff I think I've been thinking about this thing. It's like not enough. It's not good enough to make something good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is something I've been like working out in my head. Like I think out there, there's like infinite amount of serviceable writers,
Right,
serviceable artists, and they can make something. They can connect the dots. They can do a story arc. The character is different from they were what in the beginning. At the end, they've made some sort of like had some revelation, and now they're different, and they've gone through that Joseph Campbell uh, voyage of the hero or whatever,
yeah.
hero's journey, and you can fill in the dots and all that kind of stuff, fill in the blanks, and it's not good enough. It's not good enough to just do that
Right.
um, anymore. I think at one point maybe it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now so many people are making things,
Yeah.
have equal exposure to everyone else. It's not good enough to make something that's just serviceably good.
Right.
You have to make things that are, you have to be shooting for like exceptional work, exceptional in some way.
Right, right,
It doesn't mean like everyone has to be as good of an artist as Mobius. Like that's impossible,
right,
you know.
right,
But I think the goal in mind is like I want to make something. I'm gonna try to make something no one's seen before on some level, and is going to get to the core, deep core of some sort of human experience.
right.
That's both universal and specific,
Yeah, yeah,
and at least universal on some emotional level. That doesn't mean like whatever. I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't mean like repeating Star Wars over and over again. Like I
yeah.
think I'm trying to think of something that was unique and popped off. Like everything everywhere all at once. Like was sort of like a indie pop sensation
Right,
because it was really emotional. It was really like wacky and like had like dirty humor and stuff like that. But I think came out right at the right time and was speaking to a kind of like wide group of people that were experiencing some existential, like uh, I don't know. It just tapped. There's no way to predict it, but it did.
it
You
tapped
could
like a
feel the
general mentality that other people were
yeah,
going through at the time. Yeah,
yeah, and it felt ambitious.
right.
So at the same time, like you could feel the amount of work these people put into this film,
Yeah,
and it wasn't like no one was phoning it in. Like everyone was like, "We're trying to make the best movie we can make."
right, absolutely. I think
And whether or
that's
not you liked it or not, like I mean, I had friends who didn't like it or
right.
whatever. I really liked it, but like I could see the criticisms of it when you know what I mean. But you can't deny it was like a very, very unique novel experience, theater experience, and that's why it wasn't funded by Disney. It was like an independent film, and it really exploded.
Right,
Um,
absolutely. I think that, this has to go with films in general. Like, I've always noticed that it's usually the wacky, like, yet dedicated people that end up becoming the best creators, going outside of the norm. And, usually, like, a very common answer among these people is, like, why would you do that? And the first question they ask is, why not? Like, there's no
yeah,
reason for wanting to create something that special besides the fact they just wanted to create it. And I think that's really apparent in the comic book world, where it's like you see all these amazing comic books, graphic novels, all these creators creating things that they have always had in their head, and they finally put it on paper. And it's just kind of like a very, I think that's why it kind of goes back to what you were saying, where I think this world allows the ability to struggle alongside the reader, where the reader's trying to follow the story and you're trying to create that story. And both of you guys don't know what's going on, but over time you're able to get to a middle point where everybody's happy, or ideally that's what you'd want to go for. And I think that kind of shows in a lot of great examples in comic book history that we have today. And speaking on dedication, I actually wanted to ask you this question because I think it'd be really cool to just kind of understand the difference. So this was actually brought up to Dash early, before at the Blurry event, but I wanted to ask, what do you think are the differences between writing a book and creating a graphic novel or a comic? And one thing that Dash was talking about earlier was how, for artists or cartoonists, they have to look at visual space, while for writers they don't really see that. For them, maybe it's word count or maybe it's the length of the book. But that was really interesting to me because I was wondering what are other aspects of, and this actually goes back to the dedication feature of like being a comic book creator or just being a cartoonist, where what do you have to look into to properly create a quote unquote great graphic novel or cartoon in terms of understanding the formatting?
I think it's hard to nail down like one particular thing because
Yeah, yeah.
there's so many cartoonists, comic book artists who approach making comics differently
Okay.
and do it really well in their own way. For me, making a good comic um, is about one. It's about like creating space,
Mm-hmm.
like a sense of a world that when you're reading, you feel immersed in. You feel like you're entering, you almost can walk inside of this world. It feels like you could inhabit it.
Mhm.
Um, that to me, immersion is really important. And I think um, tracking space, really being aware of like blocking and things like that. I think I come from film, so in some ways I use a lot of film like techniques
Mhm.
in my comics, and I'll break away into comic specific visual storytelling, things you can't do in film, but a lot of times I'm following film rules
Got it.
because I feel like film really dialed in like a lot of ways to keep the audience from like having a brain what do you call it, dissonance,
Hmm.
um, in terms of like immersion and spatial relations and things like that. So I think about space a lot. I think about immersion a lot, and then I think about um, pacing and uh, and visual storytelling over uh, prose, I guess. To me, the more you can tell visually rather than through words, the more immersive it gets.
Right, right.
And because also I'm not a great, I've tried to write novels before,
Hmm.
and my prose is really not very good.
Mm.
So, so I'm definitely a comic book guy. Like I can write dialogue, I can't write like the whatever, describing like a table setting like George R. Martin or whatever.
Right, right.
I can't describe a space through words. It's really, and I can't really describe a person's internal experience through words. I can do it through drawing expressions
Right.
and through dialogue, but not
Got
descriptive.
it. Got it. So that's
Uh,
that's really interesting. And is that so? I know that you just mentioned, right? You use dialogue and you use expressions to kind of create that immersion. Do you
mhm.
also use other techniques? Like I know for forming, you had a lot of color. Is color
Yeah.
another way that you try to create that immersion? And I noticed another thing is diverse characters. Like you definitely have a unique character sets. It's kind of similar to Game of Thrones, where there's different types of groups and people, factions, and they kind of all interact with each other. That also helps with the immersion, right?
Yeah, I think through color and design, I'm trying to like almost um like mesmerize the audience or something. I'm
Yeah.
trying to pull them in, almost like hypnotize them into my world or something. Almost like if someone's like holding a spinning spiral in
Right.
front of you and just being like, you know,
Yeah, yeah, I get it.
listen to me or
Right,
whatever.
right. Yeah, I mean
I
the
think I'm trying
best
to do that.
yeah, I mean the
Yeah,
best movies, TV shows, and even the best stories, they do that without it like being like, like I know we're joking about it, but like you could
yeah,
watch a great movie, like for example, Everything Everywhere All at Once, you don't realize that they're pulling you in. You're just you're just zoned in because you're just wow, like this is just so amazing. And I think that's a great thing that comic books do as well. And I think that's why I really think a lot of younger audiences, like I think children, especially as they grow up, I think it's a no-brainer why they would fall in love with comic books because you see something that's so descriptive, it's so easy to understand in terms of dialogue because it's not like again, like it's not intense, heavy descriptive content. It's more like easy speech bubbles or it's like easy action lines that you're just able to understand very quickly and get into it. And there's so much color and there's so much diversity in design. Like I think it's such a unique outlet for I don't know, like I feel like comic books are both in the film industry and in the writing industry because I wouldn't say that it's one or the other. I just feel like it's such a unique middle where you see so much like what you were mentioning, film techniques put into the comic books to help with spacing, maybe even like story pacing, character dialogue. But then you also have that George R. R. Martin in a way where you do have to have on the back burner a little bit of an understanding of okay, what are these characters like? What are their flaws? What are their ambitions? emotions, what really gets them up at in the day, what puts them to sleep, and that allows you to create the writing aspect where you do create a little bit of that author experience. So I think that's really cool how, like, just talking to you, this just hit me right now where I'm thinking like, wow, like comic books are really a genuine middle between film and like books or novels, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I use a lot of symmetry
Mm.
also. So and that's like just me ripping off Kubrick. So
Right,
but
right.
I always found like whenever I watch films with lots of symmetry in them, I get like pulled in. It's almost like a gravity that's like pulling me into the scene.
Yeah, yeah. That's how I feel
So,
with Wes Anderson films and color.
yeah,
Like you just
yeah.
naturally just like you just get pulled in because you see something that just feels like the emotions that come out of the color spectrum of that he shows. You just end up feeling like, wait a minute, like this is really, it's really inviting. You feel like you're welcomed into the world that is right before you. And I think that's awesome. Yeah. I actually had another question, and this is actually going back to our conversation before as well. When we spoke in person, you mentioned that the future of graphic novels and comic books is through like independent graphic novelists, where you don't really need to go to a publisher as much as like the future is now within self-publishing. And I just wanted to ask, like, if you can just elaborate more on that, on like where you see it now, where you could see it in the future, and if there are really good examples of, besides of course, like, we've talked to like other comic book people like at that store, but if you know any great examples that you would recommend for independent graphic novelists where you're like, this is where I see the future going, I would check this out to kind of get an understanding.
Well, I would say like more than ever, independent art like cartoonists
Mm-hmm.
have tools to self-finance.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, obviously there's like Kickstarter, GoFundMe, Patreon. I feel like Patreon is the biggest one as far as like building a self-sustaining um, art life. If you could build a following on Patreon, basically it's like your readers are funding your art existence as long as you're putting stuff out.
Right.
And the only problem with that is that sometimes it can be kind of a closed loop system, and it's hard to branch out beyond your audience. And that's where publishers can be very helpful because, especially like publishers who have like a long history, um, can help you expand your reader base. So I don't think like these big publishing companies are like at the end of the road. Like I think there's always a use case for wanting to be published by like a bigger publisher and not self-publish. But um, lots of people I know who are super talented are just like yeah, they just have Patreons,
Got it.
and they're just whatever. Every intermittently, like once a year or whatever, they put out a book and just give it to their supporters.
Mm-hmm.
So the only problem with that is like it's not built into any sort of like real nationwide distro system. But I was talking to a comic book retailer the other day, and he was like all in on self. He's like the future is self-publishing, direct relationships with brick and mortar
Stores, yeah.
uh, comic book houses, and he was like, all the like old models of distribution are sort of like disappearing.
Wow.
So I don't know. I mean, I have a book coming out in 2026 with a pretty big indie publisher. So I personally still like working with publishers
Yeah.
because they handle stuff I don't want to do.
Right, right.
I want to draw and write. I don't want to go to the post office twice a day to like ship books.
Right, yeah, yeah, I get it. I just see you in the corner trying to fit like a fat book into like a little postage thing. You're like, does anybody have a bigger size? Yeah, no, I I
And
get
deal
that.
with like orders that didn't like got lost in the mail and all that kind of stuff. Like that's a whole thing.
Yeah,
That's a whole if you're built for that, good,
good
good
for
for
you.
you. I have a hard time even shipping prints. I like generally don't do it. I
Mm-hmm.
will only do it if someone wants to handle distro for me.
Mm.
So for me, it's like web comics are cool. It's published instantly to the web, goes out everywhere anyone can see it. But if you
Right.
want to ship physical copies, I put out a tarot card set last year.
Yeah, I saw that. Very cool.
Yeah, and I worked with a distro. I didn't want to send those out.
Right.
It was like a thousand boxes I would have had to go to the post office, 1,000 orders I would have had to deal with. And even still, I was like still pretty heavily involved in the packaging everything and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, this sucks. I don't
Jesse.
want to do this.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's like that's what they're for. That's what these publishing and
Yeah,
distro companies are for. They do that boring stuff. Your job is to just be the creative that you are. And I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up because I think there's a lot of energy that goes into self-publishing, like, hey, we don't need to, cut out the man, it's just us and these brick and mortar stores. Or like, I'm creating a Patreon, I don't need these people. But then yeah, like there are moments where say you do end up blowing up and you get a really good following and every person goes, can I get this, can I get that? And now it's up to you to not only provide that supply but making sure it's distributed properly. And you're kind
yeah,
of creating like your own business in a sense where it's like you have to operate the accounting and you have to operate the other stuff that I feel like publishing could probably help you out with. But no, that's
yeah.
that's a great point. And also congratulations about the upcoming it's you said it's a graphic novel, you said that's coming in 2026?
It's going to be the full collected forming like volumes one, two, and three.
Oh
So,
snap. So 3 is okay, cool. I know 3 is going to start in January, right?
no, three is done, but it's like, um, but it hasn't been printed.
Okay, cool. I'll
So
definitely
they're
get that
they're
one.
they're only going to print. They're going to print all three in one volume
Dude.
because it's been like 10 years since I finished volume two.
Right, right.
They were like, no, no one, the people who, it just wasn't realistic for them to publish a third volume for and like be able to advertise it
Got it.
as like this separate thing where you need to have read the first two books that are out of print. So yeah, so the compromise was, well, we were just going to collect all three into one.
Oh, that's perfect. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I was actually really upset when I went on your website and I actually liked the stuff that you were creating, and I saw like the link to buy it, and I click on it, and I just see you type, "Sorry, we're all sold out." I'm like, dude, what?
Yeah,
It's insane. But yeah, I'll definitely get that collection. That's amazing. Congratulations. That's actually really cool.
thanks.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and publishers like have they've built years and years and years, decades of relationships with like whatever publishers in Europe or whatever. So and like festivals and things like that. So there is like a really good reason to work with established publishers.
Right.
Um, so I don't think that's going to ever. I personally think that that's going to stick around. But if you want to do it yourself, I feel like that's totally viable. You just have to be really savvy.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Okay, awesome. And I mean, as we approach the end of the interview, I just have one more question to ask, and this kind of goes back to BookBase and what our mission is as a company. So we've talked about this before with you, Jesse, but BookBase is really big on trying to promote the social aspect of reading, and whether it's through technology or whatever the way we live life today, we've definitely noticed that maybe there is a little bit of a drop in people's ability to be able to go up to you or to another person, just be like, hey, I love this book, let's talk about it. As I've been like going through my recent journey with reading, it's kind of been feeling more of an independent journey or like a more of an individual thing until I did meet my group that I started reading books with. But I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you, and this kind of goes back to only with you with books in general or even with comic books, how important is socializing or the social aspect of reading in the comic book world, or how did you relate to it? So I know you mentioned in elementary school you would talk to your friends about comic books. Was it
Yeah.
always a social thing with you where you loved talking to a group of people about it, or was it always like like an individual experience? What was that like?
I think especially when I was young, it was extremely social thing.
Mm,
you would talk about some book you read and you would be really excited. I remember when I shared, I read The Never-Ending Story and I was like so excited to talk to my friends about it.
That's cool.
I was like in elementary school.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and now it's like, I feel like, well, I was just hanging out at a restaurant actually, it was when Dash Shaw was still in town.
Hmm.
Me and Dash and this guy Sammy Harcum got dinner, and we were talking a lot about comics and books and stuff like that and things that we liked reading recently. And they were especially like they're way bigger readers than I am, but they suggested to me a science fiction book that I bought recently that I haven't started yet, but it's sitting by my bed. So I'm
Oh,
probably
dude.
start tonight.
Oh man, I'm excited. I'm excited for you to start that. What book is it?
Hold on, let me get it. I
Yeah.
forget the.
Yeah. Oh my god.
So this came highly recommended from Dash Shaw and Sammy Harcum.
Okay.
It was Jack Vance, this science fiction author, The Eyes of
The
the Overworld.
overworld. That seems cool.
He's
Okay.
written like tons. This guy's written tons of like these like sort of like dime a quarter, but whatever. Back in the day, it used to cost a quarter, whatever.
Right, right.
Um, books. So I have no idea if I'm gonna like it or not, but I was like, yeah, I'll read like a page turner sci-fi book that was recommended to me by two people. So
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's cool. And yeah, no, I think that that's the beauty about like socializing with books. I feel like not only do you get really awesome recommendations, but then you also end up like whatever you consume on your own, depending on whatever graphic novel, whatever book you read, when you talk to another person, I feel like not only does your perspective expand, but you're also able to learn about other things that you may have not even thought about before. Like, I've been going through moments where, I would read a book, I talk to somebody about it, and they go, yeah, this chapter was really cool. I'm like, what? Like, that was not the story at all. And they're like,
yeah,
no, I like this chapter because maybe it gave a lot of insight on this character's thought process, and that was their favorite character. You just don't even realize it, and that's like the
Hmm.
beauty of talking to people about, I think, anything that has to do with creative works, but I think in general with books, at least, like, I think there is a lot of value that comes with reading. And I'm glad that you had that experience, not only now with Dash, or even like as you're meeting other people about books, but even when you were a kid. I feel like you got a lot of influence and a lot of energy from being around people that were excited to talk about the stuff that you wanted to talk about, and that's great.
Yeah, I kind of drifted away from fiction for many, many years, but I'm trying to. I was only reading nonfiction books for like years and years, but I'm trying to get back into reading fiction again.
Nice.
Um,
Y-
because I think I was talking to someone that if you only read fiction, I mean, if you only read nonfiction, this I'm paraphrasing, but basically he's like, if you only read nonfiction books, you forget how to like empathize with
right.
other. And I think part of reading fiction is learning how to see the world through someone else's eyes, or like see the world through someone else's imagination.
Got it.
And I think that that is something I kind of like. You kind of, as you get older, maybe you kind of forget to do a little bit. That
100%.
some people do.
I think it's really easy to get lost in the real world where you start forgetting the creative aspects to yourself. I think as a child, it's the other way around where you don't have a good
Yeah.
grasp of real life. It's all about creativity, and then
Mhm.
as you adult, it kind of goes the other way around. But I think the beauty is when you're able to find that middle ground where you are able to find a good balance of understanding the real world but also enjoying the fantasy elements to it. I was the same way. There was a moment where I didn't even want to read fiction. I thought it was like not useful at all. I was into
Yeah.
biographies. I just wanted to
Yeah.
learn about people.
Yeah.
And my friends would be like, "No, like just enjoy this. I know you like this. Just read it."
Yeah.
And me
Yeah.
being sassy, I was like, "No. Like you guys don't get it." But I ended up, I decided to just do it and I just read it. Next thing you know, I'm just all into fiction right now. So, I think it shifts. But I think that's awesome how you're able to kind of rotate and kind of understand, especially as a creator, that, it's cool to kind of escape real life and create something, not for other people to enjoy, but maybe it's just sometimes for you to just have an outlet to just create something that doesn't have to be grounded in reality to have a fun time. You could just be out
Yeah,
there, enjoy something. But
yeah.
no, Jesse, I just want to say thank you so much for having this interview. That pretty much wraps it all up. I just want to say thank you. And this is to anybody that's watching or listening in. Please feel free to check out Jesse's website at JESSEMOYNIHAN.com to read his forming webcomic and to also get updates on what he's going through and whatever he has going on. And also feel free to check him out on Instagram at JMOYNS. And yeah, this is the cartoonist Jesse. Thank you so much, man. This really means a lot.
Good talking to you, man.
All right, thank you, thank you.